Now, as the war in Ukraine rages on, many, of course, have a close eye on Russia as reports emerge that that country could be meddling in the U.S. midterm elections, and the outcome could greatly alter American support for Ukraine. Joining us this morning live in person is Bill Browder, the co-founder and CEO of Hermitage Capital, and, of course, the best-selling author of Freezing Order, a true story of money laundering, murder, and surviving Vladimir Putin's wrath. Bill, it's great to have you on the program this morning live. We've spoken to you twice virtually,
Yep.
So thanks for joining us here this morning. Before we talk about what you're doing today here in Toronto,
Yep.
I want to talk to you about the midterm elections and that comment that if the Republicans take control, Marjorie Taylor Greene said openly yesterday, not one more penny for Ukraine. How significant is that of a political and geopolitical move if that happens?
Well, first of all, you should understand Marjorie Taylor Greene is one of hundreds of representatives. But Kevin McCarthy, who will be the Speaker of the House, has said something much less dramatic, saying no blank check for Ukraine. But what it means is that the West, United States and other countries, are starting to get war weary, and they're starting to say, you know, are we going to, you know, we're suffering at home, are we going to send money to Ukraine? And this is a big problem for Ukraine because Ukraine is beating back the Russians, but they're doing so because they have the support of the United States and other countries. And if they lose that support, they may not be able to beat back the Russians. And so this is, you know, Putin can't win on the battlefield. He's losing on the battlefield. His troops are getting killed every day in a large quantity, but he may be able to win on the international sort of financial battlefield if the West stops supporting them.
And his technique for doing so is via social media with these bots, with these disinformation campaigns. But the strategy has changed from the 2016 election because now that the road is paved for divisions, it's much easier to go on these smaller platforms and sow the seeds there. So can you talk about how that's changed and why it's so easy for them to kind of target Democrats? Because if the Republicans win, it's in Russia's favor more so.
Yeah, I mean, yesterday, Prigozhin, Yevgeny Prigozhin, they call him Putin's chef. He's the one in charge of the Wagner paramilitary group, and he's also in charge of the Internet Research Agency, which is the trolling operation, the St. Petersburg troll factory. And I can tell you as a anti-Putin activist that in the last couple days, my Twitter feed is just bombarded with Russian trolls. It's all starting again at the exact same time that Elon Musk has said we're going to get rid of all sort of censorship or whatever you want to call it of misinformation. And so it's a toxic brew right now and going forward with the Russians using everything they've got.
It sounds like a perfect storm, which is very concerning, of course, with what's happening with Twitter right now. I mean, I'm seeing the same thing on my feed, too. It is deeply disturbing at this point. Now, today we understand you're meeting with our Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland. I'm sure you can't say too much about potentially what you're going to be discussing with her, but you must be fairly in demand. I know you speak to a lot of world leaders. I mean, you were so key in the Magnitsky Act, of course, which sort of really highlighted what Putin's regime has done in Russia. What kind of a conversation do you expect to be having today, if we can get into it perhaps that way?
Well, I've already had my meeting.
Oh, pardon me.
She's an old friend of mine. We met each other back in Moscow when we were both young, 25 years ago. I can't really disclose what we talked about, but what I can say is that, of course, we were talking about the same thing we're talking about here today, which is what's going on in Ukraine and what we think is going to happen and how we feel about it. I mean, it's... And let me tell you, she's in exactly the right place on Ukraine. That's the one thing I can say.
Okay, that's good to hear.
And can I ask you, where do you see this war going? Is there an end to it? Because it was a war of, attrition. It's just going on. And obviously Canada has been supplying Ukraine with weapons and money like other parts of the world. But where do you see the end?
Well, I wish I could see an end. The problem is that Putin is, if for any reason he was to lose power, he would go to jail, lose his money, and die. And so he can't lose power. And the biggest way he could lose power right now is to show weakness by negotiating, settling, compromising in this war. So he's not going to back down. And why would the Ukrainians back down when they're winning on the battlefield and their women are being raped and their men are being killed and their babies are being taken away? They have no incentive to back down. And so I can only imagine that this war just carries on.
Right. Okay. Kind of a chilling thought, but that's the reality we're facing right now.
Unfortunately.
Okay, well, Bill Browder, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for meeting with us to talk about this. Still so much to watch for. We appreciate your time and finally meeting you in person.
Yeah, it's great to be in the flesh. I mean,
Yeah.
after all this virtual stuff.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.